So joining us today is Dianne Saxe, one of the most influential environmental leaders in Canada. She will share with us key insights from her career previously as the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and now heading Saxe Facts, providing strategic and legal advice to accelerate the change that we need so desperately in climate change, energy, and environment. So this webinar is hosted by our SustainED innovator, Adara Hegman, a 17-year-old futurist working on climate innovation and leading climate action, both locally and nationally. So without further ado, please welcome Dianne and Adara.
Hi everyone, I'm Adara. Like Erin said, I'm 17 years old, I'm in high school right now, and I'm really passionate about climate. And my kind of interest is in technology, and I'm working on a couple projects. One's called Photon Labs and one's called Carbivore, and they're both around sustainability. So one of them is in carbon sequestration and one of them is kind of in the future of food. So I'm really interested in kind of like creating the future of different industries using technology so it can be more sustainable. And I hope to work on that more in the future as well. So kind of just to start off and get an introduction more on Dianne is, would you be able to tell us more about your story? So how you got interested in climate, started that journey, and anything else you'd really like to tell us about yourself?
I'm an environmental and energy lawyer. I started law very briefly as a tax lawyer back in the mid-1970s, and quickly realized that although tax is a very satisfying intellectual puzzle, it wasn't making the world a better place, which is why I went to law school, what I wanted to do. And so in 1975, I moved to the Ontario government, and wonderful opportunity to be able to be a lawyer in the public sector. Lots of frustrations, but at least the purpose is to serve the public interest, which was what I wanted to do. And I frankly hoped to spend my whole career there. It took me 10 years to get an environmental job. In the meantime, I did other things. I spent 6 years at the Ministry of Energy. I did a few other rounds and so on. But finally, in 1985, there was a job available at the Ministry of Environment at a time that I could move, and I moved to the Ministry of Environment and have done nothing else since. I had hoped to stay with the public service. I really had. When I got to the Ministry of Environment, I had a great boss, and then he got sick, and then I had the boss from hell. And after a year of dreading going to work every day, I quit. I went back to school, did my PhD, and I had another short detour to a big downtown law firm. Didn't like it, didn't fit. Started my own law firm in January 1991. And I ran my own law firm for 25 years, gave it up to become the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and had to give up everything I'd built for 40 years in order to become commissioner. It seemed like a fairly safe deal, in that you get a 5-year contract guaranteed by the legislature, protected by statute, and the previous commissioner had been there 15 years. And of course, I didn't see what was coming. And then when the Ford government was elected, they passed special legislation to break my contract and abolish my office. So now I'm back in private practice.
One question I have is kind of what drives you to do your climate work? And what was one of the experiences that made you kind of want to go into that field to begin with?
There's very little climate legal work. We don't have a climate law. People don't want to pay for advice on climate by and large. And so it wasn't something that I was able to do much of in private practice before I became commissioner. But once I actually became the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario officially at the Paris Climate Conference, the Conference of the Parties. And it was definitely like drinking from a fire hose. I had a good amateur understanding, which turned out to be nothing like what was really happening in the world. And the one moment that stood out to me the most of many was I went to a session about the permafrost, the cryosphere, the frozen stuff. And there were a series of researchers there who were explaining that in the last several years, they've been able to do groundbreaking research showing how the permafrost, which has been a sink for carbon dioxide for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, was now starting to melt and become a source. And the real kicker was that all those international models, all the models we read about in the newspaper, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, the integrated assessment models didn't have in them any carbon dioxide and methane from the permafrost, because there's about a 5-7 year delay between the time that field research is done and the time that it makes it into the models. And when the last model had to be locked down for the 2014 assessment report, the data on methane from the permafrost wasn't good enough, didn't meet the quality bar, so they just didn't put any of it in there. And what that meant was that all the predictions we were getting about how bad things were going to get and how and when they were going to get bad were way too optimistic, because the amount of carbon in the upper 3 meters of the permafrost is twice as much as is in the whole atmosphere right now, 3 times as much as in all the forests of the world, and none of it in the model. The whole room went silent. And I had my socks blown off. So I have children, I have grandchildren. I had no idea that the climate crisis was so immediate. I must admit, I still kind of thought, the way most people did, that it was about polar bears and other people in other places later. And what I learned at that moment was, oh, no. This is coming really fast. This is going to affect the people that I love, and even I can't be sure to die on time. So that's what drives me, is that I see the impact everywhere. I see the harm being done everywhere. I see the opportunities being thrown away and ignored. And I see that the time is so short. So I walk this knife edge between hope and despair. And the only chance for hope is to find other people to work with and do stuff now. So that's what I'm trying to do.
What are some climate myths that you often like to debunk? Because I think when you were talking about how at the time a lot of people didn't know how urgent it was. I mean, I think sometimes there's a lot of misinformation as well around climate facts, and you have your Saxe Facts and everything like that, where you try to communicate like what we really should know about the climate. What are maybe 3 points that you think are really important to know about how urgent it is right now?
Go to my website, saxefacts.com. On the presentation page, there's a number of presentations of mine. I'm going to hopefully put another one up today that I just taped a couple of weeks ago. And you can see some of the slides that I use. I guess the most common things that I like to debunk, first of all, people say to me, well, what we do doesn't matter. Canada, we're a small country, only 37 million people. This isn't about us, doesn't matter what we do. It's about China, it's about India, it's about the US. And so I point out to people that of the nearly 200 countries in the world, Canada is in the top 10 climate polluters. Not just per capita, but in total, not just now, but cumulatively. We are really among the bad guys. And so yes, what we do really does matter, and we have lots of opportunities. I mean, it's not just the oil and gas production in Alberta, although that is a big piece of it. It's also that we're profligate users, and we, among other things, we drive the worst, most climate polluting cars in the entire world. We beat out the United States, we beat out the Philippines. We're greedy and selfish. So yeah, Canada's a really big polluter. That's one that people don't seem to know. Another huge thing that I spend a lot of time on is people think, well, it isn't going to matter to me. It doesn't affect anything that I care about. And we know that most Canadians know that the climate is changing and that it's people. Most people know it's fossil fuels, but most people don't yet believe that it's actually relevant to them. If you think back 9 weeks, right, to the beginning of March, and there was lots of stuff in the news about the pandemic. We could read what was happening in Italy. We knew what happened in China. And even so, how many people still flew off to go on cruises? How many people still left on March break? How many people were still going out to restaurants and clubs? It doesn't matter how strong the evidence was, lots of people still thought, well, it doesn't matter to me. And some of those people got stuck in many places around the world. I mean, a dear friend of mine went to South Africa at that point, contrary to all the evidence. And so, this whole question, does it matter to me? Is it really going to affect me? Is one of the biggest obstacles to action. And it's really interesting that women statistically are more likely to perceive the risk as personally relevant, which I suspect is also part of why women are more active on climate. Organizations in countries with women leaders do a better job in managing it. I suspect the risk perception is a big part of it. And the third big misconception is, well, we can't afford it, right? We have to choose between our lives and our lifestyle and doing something with the climate, and so we're not going to pick the climate because we really like our lifestyle. And that is has an element of truth, but lots about it that's false. We know that in my last energy report as environmental commissioner, which is on my website, all of my reports are on my website, we called it a happier, healthier, more prosperous Ontario, because we can have all of those things. Lots of ways that make our lives better by using less fossil fuels. I mean, in Ontario, we spend between $16 and $25 billion a year just importing fossil fuels. That's money that drains out of the economy every year, at the very same time that it pollutes our air and destroys our future. If we kept 10% of that in Ontario, if we had an extra couple of $1 billion floating around the economy, that would mean a lot more jobs for young people. Better air quality, better public health. There's just so many ways in which we would be better off building a green economy than we have been with the old economy. Yes, there's some people who've made a lot of money, and there's still people making a huge amount of money doing things that are bad for the rest of us. We don't have to keep allowing that to happen.
About people not really caring about it personally. They're like, this doesn't really matter to me. And that's oftentimes why they don't want to do anything and things like that. What do you tell people who don't care about it or don't think that it matters to them in their life, or people who don't believe in climate change? What's something that you would say to them, or a story you share to kind of like shift their thinking a little bit?
Right. Well, it depends, it's different speaking one-on-one than in a talk. In a talk, there's not much I can say to people. I mean, physics doesn't care what you believe, right? It's not a matter of what you believe any more than gravity is. Hold a something heavy out over your toe, tell it you don't believe in gravity and let go, right? It isn't going to matter. So when I am speaking one-on-one with people, then I try to be curious about what they're interested in. Gardeners can see the difference in the growing season. They can see the frost-free dates have changed. They can see the temperature has changed, the precipitation has changed. Hunters really seeing how the moose are collapsing. So finding something that someone's already interested in is often a good way of having a conversation with individuals. But in groups, one of the things I do regularly is I show them a picture of my grandchildren, and I ask them to think about some young person they care about. And then I talk about what's coming during the lifetime of that young person. Because the official reports tend to say, so-and-so by 2050 or so-and-so by 2100. And that just doesn't have any emotional heft. Certainly no politician I know of cares very much about 2050 and don't care at all about 2100. They don't expect to be alive and they know they're not going to be in power. It just isn't salient. But it matters a lot to today's young people. So thinking about it through the eyes of the young people that they care about, that's often something that works.
That's awesome advice. What do you think maybe the main areas that we really need to tackle to make more climate action are, especially in Canada?
One of the factors that really changes opinions and conduct is what decision makers hear from their children, and especially their daughters. So we know that daughters speaking up to fathers about climate is intensely motivating in ways that nothing else is. So if you, so all of you speak up, encourage your friends and colleagues to speak up. Minister Wilkinson, Minister of Environment, whenever he gives a talk, he talks about his daughter who comes home from high school and tells him he's not doing enough and asks some really good question. And there's good data that daughters speaking up to their families has a big impact. So guys, never underestimate how important your questions and concerns are, especially if you learn to do it well. In terms of larger public campaigns, I am an enormous fan of Bill McKibben's. He wrote a wonderful article in the New Yorker in September called Money is the Oxygen That Fuels the Fire of Global Warming. And he pointed out that this is the time not so much to be attacking the fossil fuel companies. This is the time to be going after financial institutions, pension funds, banks, other places where large amounts of capital loom, because yes, exactly. They are, they're easier to influence. They care more about their public reputation. They have more of a social license to lose. And they make most of their money from things other than supporting the fossil fuel industry. So there's a tremendous opportunity there. So anyone who's got a pension or is paying into a pension plan, you've got a right to speak to the pension managers, and this is a good time to do it. Canada Pension, which all of us who are employed are paying into, they're still putting a huge amount of money in fossil fuels, and they lost a lot last year on investing in fossil fuels. And that's our future they're spending. And so thinking about ways to influence banks is really useful. There's a group called Shift, which trains people how to approach pension plans, and that's really good training. I would encourage you guys to take that training. And I don't suppose, Adara, you're paying into a pension plan yet, but hopefully someone in your family is, and so you could go with them and talk to. When you go to the annual meetings, talk to the bank manager, write letters to the pension managers, write letters to the newspaper. Just make this an issue. Don't let them get away with what they're doing. They're used to old habits. You think about, for example, the teachers' pension plan, one of the largest pools of capital we have in Ontario. Well, they have a whole group of people who've been making money investing in the fossil fuels for a long time, and they're used to it and they're comfortable with it. Well, how do we change that? Well, part of it is fossil fuels are increasingly a poor way to invest, and the divestment campaigns are very powerful in reducing the financial attractiveness of fossil fuels. So that's a good thing to work on. But also people speaking up is tremendously valuable. So get the training, get working with other people, and go talk to those folks. They do get influenced by hearing over and over from their constituencies.
When it comes to like the different careers and areas that you kind of talk to when it comes to like climate action, one being, like you said, like going to the financial institutions, but another one being in your kind of role of climate policy and climate law as well. You also said, there's not that many people kind of in that area, and why is it so important that we have climate law and climate policy? And what kind of person do you think would be a good fit to get into that area?
There's no one-size-fit-all answer to any of this. Different people are good at different things and interested in different things. But I would certainly encourage you to join organizations. And it doesn't have to just think about climate organizations. There's the climate organizations, Climate Fast and the Citizens Climate Lobby, which are great groups. Citizens Climate Lobby, by the way, they do free training for members. So you learn how to be a more effective lobbyist, and they help you coordinate with other people. So that's a great group to join. Citizens Climate Lobby and Climate Fast teaches you how to have conversations with people about climate. So that's really useful. But what you want is leverage, right? You want to have more impact than what you just do yourself. What you do yourself is good and important, but it's not enough. And so how do you get more leverage? You get more leverage by joining bigger groups. So, I mean, I don't know where everybody is from, but for example, I had a chat a little while ago with a person who was a part-time farmer. And he lived in a farming community, and he just felt nobody would listen to him. What can he do that matters? So I suggested that he join a local farming association. Farmers have a lot of political clout, and with any voluntary organization, a huge amount of influence on what they end up saying depends on who joins the committees, who gets on the boards, who goes to the committees, who does the work, who drafts the papers. So who is going to join? Well, are you going to join an organization? Now, you have to have some link to it. But if you like gardening, you could join a gardening organization, get them more focused on climate. If you like bird watching, you could join a bird watching organization and try to get them more focused on climate. If you are a great swimmer, I mean, are you in a swim club? Can you talk about it there? If you're a skier, maybe join the groups about protect winter, because winter and snow and winter sports are one of the things we're going to lose. So think about, where do you already have an in or an advantage or a group that you can join, and can you put climate on that agenda? Because that influences politicians. They do hear from environmental groups, and that has a certain influence, but it only goes so far because they already pigeonhole those are those people. But there's a lot of other groups. There's an enormous number of groups in Canada. So if they were also hearing from bowling leagues, and they were also hearing from gardening groups, and they were also hearing from religious groups, and they were also hearing from, I don't know, carpentry groups, right? That's a very different effect, because then they get to know, listen, a lot more people care about this. I'll tell you a story that I heard just this week that really drove home the importance of public engagement in ways that you might think wouldn't matter. So a couple of years ago, I did some climate talks in Sudbury. Sudbury is a heavy industrial town, and it's north, where they get pretty bitter winters, and some people like the idea of the world getting warmer. But there was a lot of concern about climate starting to grow. And then in early 2019, there started to be a movement for municipal climate emergency declarations. And a few people in Sudbury said, we should try to do that here. And honestly, that was a tough road to hoe. A very conservative council, very conservative municipal staff, pretty conservative area generally. But these women got busy and did a petition for a climate emergency declaration and organized, and they got a huge amount of public support. They got public support from the students, the Fridays for Future, led by an 11-year-old girl, I will say. And they got support from lots of people. And that made a transformative difference, because as it happens, I know someone who's doing some consulting work with the city, trying to get them to work on climate action, and was really finding it pretty tough going, because the staff and the council assumed that they really couldn't do much, that people wouldn't go along with it. And when there was this enormous outpouring of support for the petition, for the climate emergency declaration, for strong climate action, they were amazed and went back and gave them instructions to come up with a much more ambitious plan, which they then adopted and are now implementing. And that was because of people in the public getting organized to say loudly and clearly, lots of us want this action, we will support this. And that's one of the things politicians don't hear enough.
That's an amazing story. So I think definitely a big theme in this is to definitely get involved in bigger groups if you can, and start reaching out to politicians and speaking out more as a whole.
You're right, Katerina. There is no path forward that is free of losses. If we do nothing, many people will suffer very badly. If we do something, some people will suffer. There's no question about it. There will be changes. And so it's really important to have an on-ramp for as many of the people as possible into this future. Sometimes this is called climate justice, and usually the just transition wording is used to say that people who now work in fossil fuels have to be given an on-ramp into the new world. I think that it's broader than that. The people who are most adversely affected by climate change, which tends to be the poor, the most vulnerable, First Nations, coastal communities, they also need an on-ramp into a future that they can survive. And there's low-income people who have a particularly hard time paying higher energy costs and carbon taxes, also need a path forward. So there's a lot of different folks that need a path forward into this green economy. It can't just be a few people. And the folks who will lose their jobs in fossil fuels, that's part of it, but they're not the only ones. Having said that, the amount of job loss, I think, is frequently exaggerated. So we know that right now the federal government is putting a huge amount of money into bailing out this and that industry. Well, we know that per dollar, you're going to get 4 times as many jobs if you put the money into retrofitting buildings to make them more energy efficient than if you put them into oil and gas. So yes, if you don't put the money into oil and gas, some of those people will lose their job, but 4 times as many people who don't have jobs now will get them in energy efficiency. That's one thing. The second thing is that many of the people who work in the fossil fuel sector have really valuable skills that do and can transfer. There's a group called Iron and Steel of workers in Alberta who have been quite prominent arguing for training and a path forward so they can be part of renewable energy. I read an interesting article about a drilling company in Alberta, again, who's been making their living drilling oil wells, and they've been retraining so they can drill geothermal wells. In Manitoba, there's been a real effort to train the most disadvantaged people in remote northern communities, people who've got jail records and didn't finish high school, training them to be part of the geothermal revolution, giving them a path forward that gives them a decent quality of life and a way to get their communities off diesel. So yes, there are going to be changes. Some people will lose jobs, other people will gain jobs. But we've known since the Stern Review in 2006, every year we delay making the changes we need greatly increases what it's going to cost, the pain it's going to cause. In the same way we see it from the coronavirus. If you take action early, the cost is less, the deaths are less, the misery is less. If you wait until it's too late, the costs are enormous. Then there are many unnecessary deaths and pain. So that's the same choice we have for climate. Environmental commissioner, I was not an elected representative. I was appointed unanimously by the legislature. And I will say that I thanked every blessing I had every single day I was commissioner that I did not have to be a politician. I keep being asked. Women politicians are treated abominably, with threats and violence and abuse and disdain and distrust, and it's pretty grim. I have enormous respect for people who are willing to take that on, because the way women are treated, the way Kathleen Wynne was treated, was absolutely atrocious and completely unjustified and would not have happened to a man. It is true that, for example, I'm on Bloomberg TV News once a month talking about climate issues. And it hasn't been a month yet where I don't immediately thereafter get an abusive email from some guy in Alberta. So, I mean, that's pretty minor as these things go. No one has threatened yet to rape my children or burn my house down or shoot me. And as I said this a lot, actually, and at the end of when we knew that our office was being abolished, in many countries of the world, they don't just fire people like me, they shoot them or torture them to death. And so I'm really quite grateful to have only been fired. I mean, it would have been nice not to be fired, but that I'm able to continue to do my work as best I can is a great blessing. This is again an area where there is strength in numbers. There are more and more and more women speaking up about climate. There are more and more men who are speaking up to protect the voice of women to speak in these issues. There's a really interesting book by Mary Beard called Women in Power that I recommend, where she writes about these deep, deep cultural roots of the expectation that women will shut up on matters of public interest, that this is a man's world, and that women who are mouthy in this area, who purport to speak on public issues in the public sphere, are illegitimate in some way. This is a deeply rooted prejudice that goes back thousands of years. And so it's not easy to change quickly. It won't change easily. It won't change by itself. We have to just keep standing up. And then the way to stand up is to do it with other people. Don't do it alone. So joining groups like the Citizens Climate Lobby, which are really helpful way to join other people. One other group that I think is doing stupendous work, which actually any of you could join, is the Climate Caucus. And I don't know if you know about the Climate Caucus. This is councillors and mayors across the country who are interested in climate issues. And there are opportunities for non-elected volunteers to join and help them with their fabulous work. You can also encourage a local councillor to join the Climate Caucus, and that will give them some more support in raising climate issues locally. That's the sort of thing that the Climate Caucus is helping. And Kathleen, there's lots of other examples. The C40 has a lot of municipal examples. The Green Municipal Fund has examples. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal have increasingly good programs. Even just starting with the Green Building Standard in Toronto is a good place to start. It's much easier to just pass on other things rather than having to invent things from scratch. On retrofits, that's something that I did deal with at some considerable length in my last report, the Happier, Healthier, More Prosperous Ontario. It's got a picture of some houses with a green scarf around it, so you can recognize it there in Chapter 4, and that one is about land use planning. What people tend to do when they're establishing a green standard is to think a lot about the individual house and not think at all about density and urban planning and transport, and so that means more sprawl. It doesn't matter how good the house is, more sprawl is bad. So I would certainly recommend that you look at that report and recommend very, very strongly that they focus on density, not just on the individual houses. If it was going to be brought back, certainly I think there were some improvements. I wrote to Kathleen Wynne in 2016 or 2017 asking for some changes to the bill to make it more effective. But yes, absolutely. The giving part of my responsibilities or to the Auditor General to do or not as she wishes is a very imperfect substitute. I presented my first climate report to the senior management table of each of the major ministries, including the Ministry of Education. And I had a really good conversation with them about, exactly this question: is improving climate literacy in the schools as well as the climate performance of school infrastructure. And they had a full-time person working on that, at least under Kathleen Wynne, and then, everything went crash. Also, schools were one of the major recipients of money. Schools have a carbon footprint, and were receiving money under cap and trade to make the kind of energy efficiency improvements that many of them really, really want to make. So there was quite a lot happening. It really matters who we vote for, right? It really, really matters who we vote for. So that's another opportunity, is get involved in political parties. Canadians tend to be very reluctant to be involved in politics and just want the right to triumph without us having to get our hands dirty. And I admit to a certain element of that myself. But it doesn't work that way. Right? Political parties make decisions. And so, here we have the Conservative Party is going to be choosing a leader. How many of you have joined the Conservative Party to have a vote on who they choose? Whether it's a party you necessarily want to continue to belong to after that or not is none of my business. But there is an opportunity, right? It's a fairly small number of people who choose the leader. Who do you want to be those people? So politics matters, politicians matter. But yes, early childhood, it makes such a difference whether our kids, when they're little, get a chance to think that worms and bugs are cool and that it really matters, whether things survive or not, and to feel comfortable in nature and to feel a personal attachment to it. That really matters, and it gets taught in childhood or it doesn't. Well, I would like people to check out my podcast, Green Economy Heroes, which is all about people who are building a future in the green economy. But one thing you can each do right now that matters is right now the federal government is deciding what to do with stimulus money, right? We're in the middle of the pandemic, federal government's trying to decide what to do. So it matters that they hear from MPs. So each of you, no matter who you are, what age you are, get together with some other people and write to your MP. If you want some ideas as what to say, Climate Caucus has a great letter. I see that's been put in here, or you can find it on my website, Climate Caucus, and I help them write it. But it is a great letter from the municipalities to the federal government saying, this is what a green recovery should look like. So if you want to take that and then write your own cover letter, this is who I am, this is why it matters to me. It's really important that you do this for our future. And then send that to your MP, send a copy to the Prime Minister. If you do that today, tomorrow, get somebody else to do it the day after that, it makes a difference. The more they hear from, the better. There are windows in political theater where decisions are being made. And at that moment, people speaking up makes a huge difference. And this is one of those moments.